You know, when I was a young man, I lived a life of adventure. I was always outdoor. I was always on my bike. I was always going places, camping and fishing and hunting, and that was my life. I lived either by water or in the woods or in the mountains. And then I got a little bit older when I turned 18 and got out of high school. I ended up moving to Yosemite and living in a tent for a year. Rock climbing was my passion. I was really into being in shape. My body was important to me. And after I left Yosemite, I was searching. I was trying to figure out what it was that I wanted to do. And I thought about different jobs, different careers. And I just kept getting drawn to the outdoors. Living and working outdoors became so important to me that I couldn't fathom the idea of working inside. You know, I was younger, I worked in a grocery store. I worked, all through high school. I was a bagger in a grocery store for 3 years. And that wasn't so bad because I was really active and busy, and I got to take the carts out and load people's cars and such like that. But I still felt cooped up. I had to get outdoors. So when I was 19 years old in 1973, a buddy of mine, Paul Risk, we both got working on odd jobs. We did all sorts of things. And as soon as I did a few tree jobs, it was like a light bulb went off in my head. That's what I want to do. That's what is right for me. And it took me a while, but there was something about, climbing and being in the trees. And originally, I loved the trees, but originally it was all about my passion for getting in shape. I wanted to stay strong. I wanted to climb. I wanted to do something that filled that need inside of me. And then as I started to learn more and more about the trees, the idea of becoming a professional arborist, it was like a light bulb moment for me. And it's been 47 years now, and that's pretty much all I've ever done. So I like to share some of my stories with you guys. I like to share some of the lessons that I have learned, and every single one of my videos has a lesson attached to it. Something is always in there that I hope you guys can take away. So today's topic is going to be on young trees. I got to a job site the other day, and there was some young trees that had some problems. I didn't plant them, but I did restake them, and I identified a lot of problems that would have taken the trees down. They would have declined in health and stature. And anyway, I hope you appreciate this series. I've still got a goal of 1,000 videos. I'm up about 900 now. Been working on this YouTube channel now since 2008. It means I've been doing it for 12 years. I'll keep going as long as I can. So today, young tree planting and problems associated with nursery stock. So what's wrong with this tree? We've got 2 crepe myrtles in the backyard that were planted in a bit of a problematic way. First off, they were planted way too deep. Second off, the nursery stakes, which are over there, were still firmly attached to the trunk and causing damage to the trunk. Whenever you plant a tree, you always take off the nursery stake. The nursery stake is intended to keep that trunk straight. And generally, they're pretty small, inferior pieces of wood that rot away, and they're not intended to keep the tree strong. So ideally, you want to put in at least 1 stake and keep it so that the trunk can move a little bit, because a tree builds up strength through movement. It'll build up taper in the trunk if it's moving back and forth slowly. If you have a tree that becomes top heavy because it's got a trunk that's way too small, then it's likely going to break in the wind. But if you make it taut to 2 stakes and make it rigid without any movement, then the top of the tree will grow taller and taller and taller without building up the strength down here, and then ultimately you take the stakes off and then the tree will just sort of flop over or break. So always think about movement. You know, a tree really needs to move in the wind, and that's what builds up the, you know, it's almost like building muscles, but it builds up the taper in the trunk. Now I see on this tree there is a big area down here that was directly associated with the stake from the nursery, but there's also a sprinkler head right there. And on a thin bark tree, you don't want the water hitting it all the time. Well, actually almost any tree, but thicker bark trees are a little better. So first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to move the sprinkler out over here. And you can see that it's got a little bit of movement in here. The second thing that really bothers me is that these trees were planted too deep. I've got this funky irrigation system that everybody seems to be using these days, and they can be good and they can be bad. The bad part about them is they quite often will clog up. If you've got a lot of calcium in your water like we do, then these little sprinkler heads will get all jammed up and you'll have one plant and this line of sprinklers doesn't get any water. So let's take a look at the other tree over here. This one I've already pulled some of the dirt back. This one was planted just a little bit too deep. This one was probably 2 inches too deep because the soil was piled up around here. So I pulled it back. I left it as a little berm. But once again, these little sprinkler pipes, they were wrapped right close here. And realistically, to get a young tree to grow, you don't want to just water the root ball. You want to water beyond the root ball. So realistically, if the sprinkler watering system brings the water out here, then the roots are going to evolve where the water is. This tree right here is very, very weak. I put up some twine for right now, but I need a little bit stronger tie. I'm going to have to come back with it. And I want you to notice that I used some tape. If you put a thin piece of twine or wire or something on it, over time, the movement will actually cut into the bark. So that's why a lot of people use this green tape. But even this stuff can cause damage. I can feel it. That's an indent right there from being staked securely to the trunk. There's another one right there. There's another one. There's another one. All the way up. I mean, it was like in bondage. So there's a lot to know about how to plant a young tree to give it the best run on survival. It's an awfully whippy, skinny trunk on this tree. So I think I'm going to have to get another stronger tie. The wind just picked up, so I put that up there temporarily. As soon as I took the nursery stake off, it just bent right over. All right, this is interesting. If you look right down here, you can see where there was an old stake and then they added a new stake, and this old stake is actually digging into the trunk, and you can see some of the plastic is still down there. Hopefully it's not wrapped around. Yeah, I shouldn't have been able to do that. So as this trunk grows, this is going to become a bit of a hindrance. So I can't get it out of there. I think I might have to put vice grips or channel locks on there and pull that out. But you can see how much deeper this was planted. Clearly the gardener or landscaper didn't realize, didn't understand. Okay, whenever you plant a tree, you always want the grade of where the flare from the trunk wood turns into the root woods to be at the surface of the soil level. You never want to bury it, because over time that will create what's called basal crown rot, and you'll have a tree that looks beautiful and one day it'll suddenly die, and it's usually associated with this sort of stuff. So I see a lot of problems in here. The trunk, I would have never selected this particular individual tree. Will it survive? Yeah, likely it'll survive, but it's not about will a tree survive. It's about giving you're planting the best opportunity to develop and evolve. You don't want a tree that's struggling. You want a tree that thrives from the beginning. So choose a tree, plant it correctly, look for defects, look for scarring, look for all the potential problems, and pick the best example that you can. Also, when you pick a tree, if you find one that's been snipped off and topped and it's got all kinds of problems in the upper canopy, that may be something that you want to avoid as well. Sometimes you'll have really tight crotches that you can imagine as this one gets bigger and this one gets bigger, that may result in a split. Just don't look at the tree as a 1-inch diameter sapling. Look at it as a significant future tree that's going to evolve into something that you're going to be really happy with. Oh, there we go. That would eventually have grown into the trunk of the tree. Always get these things out when you plant your trees. You don't want anything right next to the wood or the trunk of the tree. And there's a little hole down there, so I'm going to put a little bit of dirt back down there, try to fill it in. I'm still wondering if I've got it down deep enough. This little Japanese maple also appears to be planted too deep. It's got soil up around the trunk. There should be a natural flare, and furthermore, the type of irrigation system that they've got this wrapped up in is this little drip irrigation that has all these little holes, these little emitters, and they just bend over the end and then put one of these things to keep it from coming out. Otherwise it all pours out on one side. But in order to get it down to the right level, first thing I got to do is I got to pull that out of there, and all the water is sitting there soaking right on this trunk. So hopefully it's not going to be a problem, but it wouldn't surprise me if, because it's buried too deep, the water has been sitting on this trunk for a while and it may be causing some problems. Let me pull it apart and let me pull the dirt away from here and see what it looks like. Now there you go. It was about 3 inches too deep, and I'm not even sure I've got the flare, but I'm starting to hit a lot of roots right here, so I'm thinking that's about as far as I want to go. Had it stayed like this for years and years and years, I absolutely guarantee that all this wood, all this bark right here would have degraded and caused the trunk of the tree to rot out. I always like to put a little bit of push on the trunk of a tree if it's a small tree, and that tells me a lot. That tells me, is it still bound up in the root ball from the container? A lot of times, you know, a young tree is planted with all of its roots wrapped up in a can. They just plop that in the ground and the roots continue to wrap up and they girdle itself, and you can go up and lean on a tree and it's not seated in the ground very well. So I'm going to go ahead and put this irrigation back in, but I'm going to put it out far now. I'm going to put it way out here, all the way around, so we can water this area down here, because you don't really want the water to continually sit inside this hollow, this berm. Now the challenge is going to be keeping this area clean. The gardeners are going to have the temptation to take all this bark and rake it back in and fill this back in. So this will be a bit of a job for the homeowner to keep up on and pay attention to. I'll bring it to his attention, but this could easily go bad again. Hopefully this will preserve this tree and allow it to develop into something nice. Japanese maple.